For him, it was the middle of the workday, about 9 p.m. President Castro, it has been 25 years since you and I sat like this. You are no longer smoking?
I think I smoked at that time. I've not been smoking for 17 years now. But you don't look like 25 years have passed. You look exactly the same.
You are saying this so I will not ask tough questions.
No, of course not. But partly, yes, of course. But the difficult questions will come anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, you're not wearing a uniform now. You wear suits.
Barbara, precisely in order to seduce you, and for you to be kind to me, to have pity on me.
I see. Okay. We will see. I want to talk about relations between our country today. The U.S. has called Cuba a terrorist state. After September 11th, you offered your condolences to the United States. You criticized the attacks. You did not oppose the U.S. use of Guantanamo as a prison. But the U.S. State Department says that your government has deliberately tried to sabotage the U.S.'s anti-terrorist efforts by providing false leads. And they have stated that Cuba is developing biological weapons. Two very strong accusations against your country.
The only thing I can tell you about that, in real terms, is that all those accusations are absolute lies. It is not that it is a false version, but absolute lies. I mean, they become an insult against the intelligence of any person to try to deceive them like that. Because a small nation like ours would have to be absolutely insane. Being so close to the most powerful country in the world, it would be so insane for such a country to commit any terrorist acts against the United States. The historical truth is that thousands and thousands of terrorist actions have been conducted against our country. Sabotages, plans, attempts against my life, and plans to have caused thousands of casualties. And there is not one case. There is not one case of one American who has died of the result of some action on the part of Cuba against the United States. That has not happened in 43 years. We are willing to invite the international scientific community to come here and take a look at whatever at those places where hypothetically we are conducting such research. We would have to be mad out of our minds to try to manufacture the weapon.
President Castro, you oppose an attack against Iraq, yes?
I am not the only one.
In your view, is Saddam Hussein a good leader for the people of Iraq?
Almost on the eve of an announced war, I wonder, what sense does it make for me to play the judge and issue my views about this in one sense or another one? I think I would be pouring oil on the flame.
It was obvious to us that President Castro did not want to directly challenge President Bush, especially while support is building in Congress to further relax the restrictions on American trade and travel. But President Bush has said that he will veto all attempts to ease the sanctions unless, he says, you allow opposition parties to organize and to speak, that you release political prisoners, and most important, that you have free elections monitored by objective outside observers. Now, you want the sanctions lifted. Is there anything that you can say or do that can change this?
It is not my purpose to use this interview to make criticisms or to attack President Bush. I think we should all dispense with the lies and rhetoric and abide by reasoning. The last time when he made a number of very insulting statements against us, he made all those accusations and others. It was after his speech on May 20th in Miami.
For 43 years, every election in Cuba has been a fraud and a sham. To make them free and fair, they must give opposition candidates the freedom to organize, assemble, and speak. Viva Cuba Libre!
I think he was very ill-advised to make that speech. We are an independent nation. We are very sensitive to our rights, and we are very sensitive to the respect our dignity deserves.
But what it seems to boil down to is freedom, freedom of expression. People in your own country have asked for more democracy, but you have never allowed anyone to run opposite you. So what we keep talking about is freedom, is more openness.
Barbara, is this your statement, or is this President Bush's statement? Can I ask you any questions?
Sure.
You have millions of questions. You have more questions than the U.S. Air Force has missiles.
You have good answers.
I tell you, Barbara, now I'd like to say this. Look, is it that in those countries with 25% of the people or 10% of the people are absolute illiterates, can you speak of freedom there? Is it possible for them to be free? Don't you need some education to do that? Don't you need some culture? Without culture and without knowledge, there's no possibility to attain freedom.
For Castro, freedom starts with education. And if literacy alone were the yardstick, Cuba would rank as one of the freest nations on earth. The literacy rate is 96%. This is a teacher's college in Havana, where the emphasis is on training for high school classrooms, where Castro says he wants his best and his brightest. Our visit here had little advance notice. The welcome these students gave him, the almost overwhelming emotion we saw on campus, seemed spontaneous. In my country, there are complaints that teachers are underpaid. In your country, maybe bellboys in hotels make more than teachers because they are paid in dollars and not pesos. Does that bother you?
Well, one would dream to reach heaven, you know. We would like to pay the best of salaries to our teachers, but let's talk without comparing it to the tourist industry. We have tried, though, for them to have the best that we can afford. But if the country had 10,000 teachers, we could raise their wages and it would be easier. But then we have 200,000 teachers. It would be easier to pay higher wages to 20,000 people than it is to pay to 200,000. The people who sacrifice the most, they are the teachers.
What was your own favorite subject when you were a child?
History.
History?
History, yes.
Castro's passion for history was part of his revolutionary manifesto. His creed became, "History will absolve me." He says his love of the subject came to him early.
History brought more stories, you know. I always loved the stories. You know, first the sacred history and the creation of the universe, Adam and Eve, and the forbidden apple, and then Noah's Ark and the universe of... I love that. That I began learning in first grade. I liked that better than math then. Geography, yes, I liked it also because it meant like touring the world, you know, and there was no subject about the revolution. I wasn't taught about that in school.
No, then, yeah, history will absolve me. I remember that.
Sacred history will also absolve me.
When 2020 returns, Barbara Walters' exclusive interview with Fidel Castro continues after a brief commercial, a concept completely foreign to Castro.
Are we going to have advertising in the interviews?
One thing has not changed between Fidel Castro and me. We still like to argue. 25 years ago, we clashed over questions about freedom. This time, even after all these years, we still argue. Here's how we sparred the first time around. Let me be specific. Your newspapers, radio, television, motion pictures are under state control. No dissent or opposition is allowed in the public media.
Barbara,
Nosotros no tenemos las mismas concepciones.
We do not have your same conceptions.
Nosotros no tenemos el concepto de libertad de
Our
prensa.
concept of freedom of the press is not yours.
Desde luego, se lo digo con toda.
And I say this very
No
honestly.
tengo que ocultar absolutamente.
I have nothing to hide.
Si nos preguntan que aquí puede aparecer un periódico.
If you ask us if a paper could appear here against socialism, I could say honestly, no, it cannot
No lo
appear.
permitirá ni el partido,
It would not be allowed by
ni
the
el
party,
gobierno,
the government,
ni el
nor
pueblo.
the people.
En ese sentido,
Okay.
no poseemos
In that sense,
la libertad
we do
de
not
prensa.
have
posee
the
usted.
freedom of the press that you possess in the U.S.
You still do not have freedom of the press. You do not have your newspapers, your radio, television, everything is controlled.
Muy difícil, pero
Yes, Barbara, it's very difficult to persuade
te
you.
dije que no debíamos enfrascarnos en
Okay.
Bárbara, para que volvamos a repetir aquella...
There's no sense in going back to those arguments of years ago. This argument is too old now. Now I would like to say this.
Pero no de todo lo norteamericano.
Not all Americans feel the same. Look, Barbara, I have been talking to Americans for 43 years, and in the last few years much more. And sometimes I am criticized for the many hours I spend talking with them. We go on until 3 in the morning.
I know. You and I have done that.
Pero notamos mucho los problemas del mundo.
And you know, I think that the Americans are coming to understand better that there are more important problems in the world than definitions of freedom of the press.
Yeah, but we allow opposition. We don't mind that.
Oye,
You know.
¿tú has visto, Bárbara, alguna vez?
Barbara,
Fíjate,
have you ever seen a demonstration in Cuba that has been suppressed with tear gas?
Do you allow demonstrations at all?
¿Y ustedes la permiten?
And do you allow them?
Porque aquí
Do
no
you
se
allow
produce,
them?
pero para usted
Here we
tenemos
don't have them.
But do you allow them if someone wanted
Why do we
to?
need to prevent anything that doesn't happen at all?
¿Existe?
You wouldn't
Why
let
do we
it.
need to prohibit something that doesn't exist, Barbara?
But you don't let it happen. Maybe people might want to protest.
¿Pero por qué no lo hace?
But why don't they do it if they want
¿Por
it?
qué no
You
lo
won't
hace?
allow it.
Nosotros recogemos.
Look, Barbara, we collect unofficial polls, and these are not directed polls where you ask a question that would guide the answer. No, these are open questions so we know how the people feel about the
El mayor
issues.
número de, por ejemplo, de médicos per
For
cápita.
instance, Cuba has the highest number of doctors per capita in the world. In the world. All the citizens have full guarantee for their life. Their children do not need to become beggars here. They have the possibility to study free of charge into the university.
You talk about polls, but we are familiar with a poll of 11,000 people, the Varela polls, in which they asked for more democracy. Petitions calling for a referendum on more democracy started being circulated in Cuba more than a year ago as part of what is called the Varela Project. Under Cuba's constitution, a petition signed by more than 10,000 citizens should force a referendum. The Varela petitions bear more than 11,000 signatures. And under your constitution, with 10,000 signatures, you should honor that. But it has not been these people who were dissenting and wanted more freedom.
A ver, pero ella dice, esa es la declaración de ella.
Is that your statement?
No, it's a
Yes.
question. My question is, why did you not honor those dissenters?
La pregunta de si tienen derecho...
Now you said that there were 10,000 people having the right to present a petition. Yes, they have the right to present a petition, but not to change the Constitution. Anyone has the right to present a petition, yes, and they will receive the response from the National Assembly.
Darán todos los pasos.
But I'm sure the National Assembly will take all the necessary steps. They will have their response in due course. In due course.
You feel socialism works. It seems that the tide in the rest of the world is turning away, that you see China allowing more free enterprise. The Soviet Union is no more. We see people in your country hungry. We see people going on boats and risking their lives to leave this country. So it seems to many people that socialism is not working. Does socialism work?
Sí.
See,
Yes, it
okay.
does. Yes, our socialism works in our country. I can only speak to you about Cuba. I know what the Chinese have done and the Vietnamese have done for their people. If they did not have socialism, they wouldn't have been able to attain the economic growth they have today. Does capitalism work in Mexico when millions of Mexicans are putting their life at risk? When thousands die every year trying to get into the United States? Now you say that socialism doesn't work here? Then capitalism doesn't work either.
When 2020 returns,
Does Elian ever mention America?
next.
3 years ago, a little Cuban boy was pulled from the sea and into a swirling drama. His name, Elian Gonzalez. He survived while his mother drowned trying to escape the poverty in her country. For many, the face of a 6-year-old boy came to symbolize the problems in Castro's Cuba. Elian's story split public opinion wide open in this country and inflamed the Cuban-American community in Miami. Some felt the child belonged here, where they said he could have a better life, and passions flared when it was decided that Elian be returned to his father in Cuba. How has Elian Gonzalez fared since he left the headlines? I asked President Castro about the boy, and then his father spoke to me. Many Americans, young Americans, learned about Cuba in recent years because of the Elian Gonzalez case. What effect do you think it had on U.S.-Cuban relations? Did it help or did it hurt?
No, it could not hurt us. Let us say that the effect it had on our people was to multiply our good feelings towards the American people. And perhaps that situation gave a rise to the possibility of the Americans knowing a little bit better about Cuba. It should not be forgotten that over 80% of Americans supported the return of the child to Cuba. And that was an act of justice.
How is Elian today?
He's very well. He's very active, very intelligent. I think he's in 4th grade now. Very soon, he will be in junior high school, and he's an excellent boy. His family is also an excellent family. I do not know whether you have had any chance to meet him.
Indeed, our earlier request to interview Elian's father had been declined. But when I asked President Castro personally, Juan Miguel Gonzalez appeared the next morning. He had been whisked to Havana in a government car from his home an hour and a half away. And this is Elian today, big boy.
Bueno, el próximo 6 de diciembre cumple 9.
He will be 9 on December the 6th.
Sí, ha crecido bastante, casi está de mi tamaño.
He's almost as tall as I am now. He's doing karate at school. He's a green belt.
Does Elian ever mention America?
Simplemente sí.
He just remembers the wonderful people with which he shared great times when we went there to look for him, and the times we shared together in America. But he tries not to remember the bad times he had. From the time he was with the family, from the time they did things against me and separated us, he doesn't remember that as a good time.
Does Elian ever ask about his mother?
I
have tried to keep the image of his mother alive. In his bedroom, for example, we have a picture of his mother. And for Mother's Day, her birthday, we usually have some flowers.
Does he know how his mother died?
Yes, he remembers everything. He knows and is aware of everything that happened.
What would you most like people to know about your son?
I would like them to know that after 3 years of being here in Cuba with his family, he's very happy. And that we are very thankful to the Cuban people for all the help and the American people for all the help they gave.
Although his father says that Elian is very happy, the fact is that life in Cuba for most families is difficult. These old cars are rolling reminders of the American embargo in effect since 1960. Congress permitted the export of food to Cuba 2 years ago, but only for cash. The Cuban government feeds its people a Spartan but adequate diet. Nobody starves. Most basic commodities, however, are rationed. The 1990 collapse of the Soviet Union, once Cuba's economic mainstay, brought hard times from which the country is only now recovering. Tourism, almost non-existent when I visited here 25 years ago, now attracts over 1 million visitors a year, mainly Europeans and Canadians. This is one of several squares or plazas in old Havana, and you can see the contrast. Behind me is a building that has been renovated. It's now going to be a hotel and a restaurant. They're hoping to have more tourists here, especially American tourists, who, of course, not allowed to come here now. Right over here, you can see one of the old buildings dating back to the 1800s. People are living in it, obviously. As you can see, certainly no washing machines. When they have money, they renovate. When they don't have money, this is what you have. When I was last here, the U.S. dollar was illegal. Now it is both legal and preferred. Some Americans defy the travel ban and come for the pleasure of Cuba.
Nobody really acknowledges that law. I have been here illegally probably five times in the last 6 or 7 years.
Private restaurants are now allowed in socialist Cuba. Shops and bars are run by budding capitalists. The seedy side of tourism is seen here as well, but the government says it is tackling that problem. We have heard that tourists do come here because there is prostitution of men, and women, and even children, and that it is allowed. Did not used to be, but is now. Is that untrue?
In the first years of the revolution, we educated tens of thousands of women who had been living on prostitution, and they were given jobs. Yes, and the brothels were closed. The brothels were closed. We don't say that there are no prostitutes, but that does not mean that we promote it. There has been no tolerance in this country, and there will not be tolerance of sexual tourism.
When 2020 continues.
Were we that close to nuclear war? We have started to hear the drums of war pounding now. But 40 years ago at this time, they were deafening. Today in Havana, an international conference begins, marking the anniversary of what we call the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was 1962. The president was John F. Kennedy. And although we were afraid then, most Americans never knew just how close we came to nuclear war. And few have ever heard Fidel Castro's side of the story. Now, as high-level members of the Kennedy administration attend the conference in Cuba, Fidel Castro reveals to us formally classified information.
All ships of any kind bound to Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
For 13 days in October of 1962, the world held its breath. President Kennedy issued an ultimatum on October 22nd that any nuclear weapon launched from Cuba would be considered a Soviet attack, the first strike in a nuclear war. Negotiations between Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev finally resulted in the Soviet missiles being withdrawn from Cuba, but we now know it was a nearly fatal collision. President Castro showed me documents that are being newly released this week at a conference to mark the 40th anniversary of the missile crisis. Is it the case that you wrote to Premier Khrushchev saying that if the United States did invade Cuba, the response should be a Soviet first strike, that is, a nuclear strike against the U.S.? Were we that close to nuclear war?
Yes, we were very close to the nuclear war, extremely close. Yes, I said to Khrushchev, there is going to be an attack. In that case, do not give your adversary the possibility of a first strike that catches you off guard. Later, there was a great controversy because he misinterpreted my words. He said that I had said to him to deal a first strike, a preemptive strike, to begin a war. And I never said that. I only said not to give Americans the chance to strike first, because I was sure that the U.S. reaction would be to strike against Soviet targets.
Did you, Mr. President, think there was going to be an invasion by the United States?
Well, it was not something I was worried about because we had been expecting it for a long time. The number of weapons we had at that time made us feel confident that we would be able to defend ourselves and resist. Resist who knows for how long. I think a long time. Perhaps we would have been the first Vietnam. So we were not afraid. That was not the reason for us to accept those missiles. Having the missiles in Cuba was very important for the Soviet leaders. I think they were very worried. The Soviets were. Even though Nikita was a bold man, he was a courageous man, and I can make criticisms of him. I realized it from that time, the political mistakes he was making, which would later contribute a lot to the crisis because he did not tell the truth to Kennedy. In fact, he misled Kennedy. That was his main flaw. We insisted more than once that military agreement between our two countries should be made public, that we should not hide anything, because we were doing nothing illegal. We were acting within the international law. However, Khrushchev did not pay any attention to us.
So you think that if he had said, we're going to put missiles there for a balance of power, instead of keeping it secret, things might have been different?
When Kennedy was discussing with Khrushchev whether there were offensive weapons in Cuba, Khrushchev said no. Therefore, Kennedy was misled. That was a very big mistake on the part of Khrushchev, one that we opposed vehemently. First, he misled Kennedy, and later, he made other military mistakes. And that meant a tremendous risk for our country.
When 2020 continues, so enigmatic, not even the Cuban people really know his private life. Will the elusive Fidel Castro finally give up his secrets?
Will you indulge me in one personal question?
Next.
And finally, what of the future? The future of Cuba and Fidel Castro's own future. Will he remain in power until the day he dies? And what really has been the effect of the American embargo against his country? If the embargo were lifted, would your country be economically sound? Would you then have no rationing? Would you then have no economic hardship if the embargo were lifted? Is that all it takes? Or is it some failure?
Look, even if the embargo is not lifted, Cuba will continue to advance. The blockade has taught us a few lessons. We have become a hard-working people. We have become an austere people. We have learned how to tighten our belts, but we have also learned how to be generous. Tell me what other country in the world has 3,000 doctors working for free in Africa and Latin America? In the mountains, in the jungles, this country alone, this garbage of a country, this trash of a society, can send 3,000 people. Dr. Barbara, I'm not answering to you. No, I'm answering to those who feel like that. I'm answering to the people who feel like that.
Mr. President, do you think that the basis of the embargo against Cuba is all politics in America today?
Yes, political reasons. It's all politics, and they do not enjoy the support of the majority of the American people. What would be the damage if the U.S. government had lifted the embargo? Where is the glory for the United States of keeping this embargo here? It doesn't make sense, Barbara.
But to many Americans, and certainly to the Bush administration, the embargo does make sense. It was originally imposed to isolate Castro, compelling him to make democratic reforms or even to step down. Neither has happened. Do you think about transferring power now, or do you think that you will die as the leader of Cuba?
algún tipo de accidente, enfermedad o algo que...
It would have to be an accident that would incapacitate me to do my work.
You will stay in charge until you are gone?
You should understand that this is not up to me, Barbara. Whether I stay in charge or not, it is not up to me. I would have to ask for our people's permission. They could consider that treason. You know, I have the experience of so many years, and they value that, Barbara.
The reality is that in 4 decades, Fidel Castro has never given his people the choice of another leader. Nor do they really know much about his personal life. He prefers it that way. We do know that Castro was a child of privilege who turned his back on the establishment after law school. His current wife occasionally appears in public, as she did here with Elian Gonzalez, but she is not usually seen at Castro's side. We know Fidel Castro is a grandfather, but the details are sketchy. Mr. President, Senor President Castro, will you indulge me in one personal question? Because we are talking about children.
Are you going to give me a test?
No test.
Go on, ask your question.
We are talking about children. And I know you are a very private man. But we hear that you have 5 wonderful sons.
It's prohibited to go into my personal life.
Grandchildren.
It's not our way.
Great-grandchildren. And even a son.
Yes, we have descendants and all that. But that's absolutely out of the question. It's my private life.
I tried.
My human right.
I tried.
It's my human right. I cling to my human right to defend my privacy.
I care a reporter's right to ask the question.
Claro. Of course. And it is my human right to say no.
You're right. One thing, are there triplets? Grandchildren triplets? Wouldn't you like to know?
Well, I think you are. There's some triplets around. I've heard that they exist.
But someday he may even give an answer. You and I have not talked like this in 25 years, and I appreciate your letting me ask questions. I'm not sure we're going to be...
Now I'm thinking about the next 25 years. Why not?
Okay.
I'm already thinking about our next interview in 25 years, Barbara.
Thank you, President Castro, for your time.
Thank you very much.
I'll be back with some closing thoughts.
Vision from Sprint, clearly. A whole new way to look at wireless.
I very much doubt that Fidel Castro and I will be doing another interview in 25 years. It's hard to say what Cuba will be like then. When Castro is gone, the embargo will probably be lifted. Cuba will be flooded with American tourists and their money. There may also be an invasion of American businessmen, a McDonald's on the corner, a Hilton hotel. Will the country then become a democracy as we know it? Or will the people want to keep the socialist government they have now? Castro thinks so. He has been in power now for more than 40 years. Most Cubans, even those middle-aged, have never known another leader. Castro has been their father, their protector, their hero. So they may fear change. For others, especially Cuban Americans, Castro is a man who impoverished their homeland, imprisoned many of their friends, and destroyed their ideals. They will undoubtedly feel relief when he is gone. So the future of Cuba is uncertain. One thing is certain. Cuba is a very small country, but the figure of Fidel Castro has been huge. And that's our program for tonight. John Miller will be back with me next week, and for all of us at 2020, have a good weekend and good night.
Pretty girl.
For him, it was the middle of the workday, about 9 p.m. President Castro, it has been 25 years since you and I sat like this. You are no longer smoking?
Yo creo que fumaba entonces.
I think I smoked at that time. I've not been smoking for 17 years now. But you don't look like 25 years have passed. You look exactly the same.
You are saying this so I will not ask tough questions.
No, yo sé que
No, of course not. But partly, yes, of course. But the difficult questions will come anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, you're not wearing a uniform now. You wear suits.
Barbara, precisely in order to seduce you, and for you to be kind to me, to have pity on me.
I see. Okay. We will see. I want to talk about relations between our country today. The U.S. has called Cuba speak, that you release political prisoners, and most important, that you have free elections monitored by objective outside observers. Now, you want the sanctions lifted. Is there anything that you can say or do that can change this?
No tengo el propósito.
It is not my purpose to use this interview to make criticisms or to attack President Bush. I think we should all dispense with the lies and rhetoric and abide by reasoning. The last time when he made a number of very insulting statements against us, he made all those accusations and others. It was after his speech on May 20th in Miami.
For 43 years, every election in Cuba has been a fraud and a sham. To make them free and fair, they...
A terrorist state. After September 11th, you offered your condolences to the United States. You criticized the attacks. You did not oppose the U.S. use of Guantanamo as a prison. But the U.S. State Department says that your government has deliberately tried to sabotage the U.S.'s anti-terrorist efforts by providing false leads. And they have stated that Cuba is developing biological weapons. Two very strong accusations against your country.
The only thing I can tell you about that, in real terms, is that all those accusations are absolute lies. It is not that it is a false version, but absolute lies. I mean, they become an insult against the intelligence of any person to try to deceive them like that. Our minds to try to manufacture the weapon.
President Castro, you oppose an attack against Iraq. Yes?
I am not the only one.
In your view, is Saddam Hussein a good leader for the people of Iraq?
Almost on the eve of an announced war, I wonder, what sense does it make for me to play the judge and issue my views about this in one sense or another one? I think I would be pouring oil on the flame.
It was obvious to us that President Castro did not want to directly challenge President Bush, especially while support is building in Congress to further relax the restrictions on American trade and travel. But President Bush has said that he will veto all attempts to ease the sanctions unless, he says, you allow opposition parties to organize and to split.
Because a small nation like ours would have to be absolutely insane. Being so close to the most powerful country in the world. It would be so insane for such a country to commit any terrorist acts against the United States. The historical truth is that thousands and thousands of terrorist actions have been conducted against our country. Sabotages, plans, attempts against my life, and plans to have caused thousands of casualties. And there is not one case. There is not one case of one American who has died of the result of some action on the part of Cuba against the United States. That has not happened in 43 years. We are willing to invite the international scientific community to come here and take a look at whatever at those places where hypothetically we are conducting such research. We would have to be mad out of